you'd like to join the classes live in the masjid, then click on the link below. Inshallah, it will take you to a Telegram group that has the details of all the class timings, the dates, the days, the addresses and the locations of the masjid. So click on that link and hopefully we'll see you there, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Good to see brothers back, mashallah, tabarakallah. Sisters, obviously we can't see them for obvious reasons, but it's good for them to be back as well. Is the petrol crisis still going on? Is it still going on? It's the benefit of walking. Alhamdulillah, where I live, the masjid, I can walk. To my office, I can walk. Everything is just a walk. Tesco, walk. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to carry on with our class in fiqh first. Just an announcement to be made for the sisters. Sisters can now participate. We've set up a Google Classroom for them. So if sisters want to ask questions live, or if I ask questions and you guys answer, sisters can participate as well. The only request I have for the sisters is always with the brothers, is to keep the questions relevant to the class. Any question that is not relevant to the class, even a slight deviation, I will just not consider it. So please don't do that, inshallah ta'ala, because we want to keep things smooth and consistent. If we could just get someone to test, can we get one of the sisters just sending a message as a test to make sure it's working? Because it should be working. So inshallah ta'ala, we're carrying on with fiqh, and we are now in Kitab al-Tahara, right? We are in Kitab al-Tahara. And we took the all-important lesson on which topic last week? The topic of water, because Tahara is primarily done through water. So then if water is the thing that we use for Tahara, we know what type of water we can use and what we can't use. Does that make sense? And the different types of water that exist. And alhamdulillah, we went through a lot. But we didn't go for everything. There's a lot more in just the chapter of water. This is just beginner stage. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to go through the topic of nawaqid al-wudhu, the things that break wudu. Because if tahara is about ultimately the key to being able to pray the salah, what we're going to learn, everything's going to lead us up to primarily two things: wudu and ghusl. Because after that you can pray. Does that make sense? So after learning what water is, the next stage is what? The next stage is to learn, okay, what is the thing that breaks my wudu, which is going to require me to have to go to use the water to do wudu. So today's lesson is all about what breaks our wudu. Now, in the madhab of Imam Shafi'i, there are only 4 things that will ever break your wudu. Is there a 5th? No. Only 4. So if you come across a 5th, you ignore it, because it's not part of the 4. If it's not part of these 4, then it's not breaking your wudu. Is that clear? Okay. The first of these 4 is al-kharij min as-sabilayn. Anything to come out of your front passage or your back passage. If something comes out your front passage or your back passage, this has now broken your wudu. Now, when this breaks your wudu, does it put you in a state of major impurity or minor impurity? Minor. This is called hadath what? Hadath al-asghar. Minor impurity. So then, straight away you should also know that when someone talks to you about the nawaqid al-wudu, they're also talking to you about the asbab, the reasons for entering in a state of hadath al-asghar. In other words, minor impurity, the things that make you enter it, are the exact same as the things that break your wudu. So if someone says to you, what are the 4? How many things break your wudu? You say 4. Someone says to you, how many things are the reason that enter you into a state of minor impurity? You say 4. It's the same thing. Does that make sense? Because when your wudu has broken, you have entered into a state of minor impurity. The first of which is al-kharij min as-sabilayn, something to come out of your front passage and your back passage. Now, it doesn't matter if what comes out of your front or back passage is something which is impure or pure. Sometimes things that are tahir can come out of you. Like, for example, someone may insert a medicine inside of their back passage, as we know that that's one of the ways to treat patients for certain illnesses. And if they put that medicine in the back passage, it doesn't go in, it just comes right out. that breaks the person's wudu. Does that make sense? He just put it in and it came out straight away. It doesn't matter. If anything comes through that passage, whether it was you put it in yourself, whether it was something that was tahir, like the pill that came out, or whether it was impure, like feces, or whether it's a solid, whether it's a liquid, whether it's alive, whether it's dead. Sometimes people, they have things that come out of them. For example, certain lice, certain bacteria and things come out, they grow inside of people. Does that make sense? They have certain medical illnesses. So these issues, they come out. So it doesn't matter whether it is any of those things. Did it come out of your front or back passage? Doesn't matter how long it was in there for. It broke your wudu. Does that make sense? And the dalil for this is the fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. That Allah Azza wa Jalla doesn't accept anyone's salah if he falls into hadith until he does wudu. These are the things that cause a person to fall into hadith. Does that make sense? There's only one exception to something that can come out of your front or back. It can't come out of your back, sorry. It can only come out of your front. And it doesn't break your wudu. And that's seminal fluid. That's seminal fluid. If seminal fluid comes out of a person, if that comes out of a person, that does not break your wudu. Why? It's not najis, that's true. It's not najis, it's tahir. But the reason is because it requires ghusl. Right? أوجب أعظم الأمرين. The ulama, they say it necessitates the greater of the two. So it doesn't require wudu. It requires ghusl. So the scholars say, we don't say it breaks your wudu. And there's a reason for it. But that reason is something that we don't need to go into. It's discussed in the bigger, more detailed books as we go above and beyond. Does that make sense? And this is one of the things that the Shafi'i madhab is a bit unique on. That it says, many, which is seminal fluid coming out of you, it doesn't break your wudu. But it does cause you to have to go and do a ghusl. So you still can't pray. So in summary of the first point, anything that comes out of your front and back passage, regardless of the circumstances of that thing or how it came out, it will break your wudu. It will put you in a state of minor ritual impurity, hadathul asghar, except for seminal fluid. Does that make sense? But just because we said seminal fluid doesn't break your wudu, doesn't mean that you can pray, because you need to now do what? Ghusl. Beautiful. The second thing that breaks your wudu and enters you into a state of hadathul asghar is zawalul aql, is your mind going, your consciousness going, you becoming unconscious. You're becoming unconscious, regardless of whether it's because you fell asleep, regardless of whether it's because you entered into a state of insanity. You lost your sanity. Sometimes people, they lose their sanity and then they gain their sanity back. When they became insane for that moment, they lost their what? They lost their mind. So it's not just unconsciousness in that you're asleep, but it's that your mind is now not able to control the situation that you're in. You can't control your mind. Your mind has lost control. Does that make sense? And that could be even when you're awake. So it's not just when you go to sleep. So that's why here we didn't say sleep. We say zawalul aql. It's for your aql to go. It's for your mind to go. Because you fell asleep. Because you fell into insanity. Because a person became intoxicated. He became drunk. He became high. Does that make sense? All of these reasons what? A person cannot what? They cannot pray because their wudu has broken. I just want to mention something as a side point. It's not connected to this part of the lesson at all. Because we have a lot of young brothers, I think it's important to mention. Okay? The issue of drugs. The issue of what? Issue of drugs. Why is it that we're not allowed to take drugs? What's the reason that we're not allowed to take drugs? Why is it haram? Who can tell me the reason why it's haram? Say that again? Yeah, it intoxicates you. Barakallahu feek. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Kullu muskirin haram. Every single intoxicant is haram. So it makes what? If it takes your mind away, if it gets you high, if it gets you drunk, if it gets you tipsy, this now becomes haram. Does that make sense? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu innama al-khamru wal-maisiru wal-ansabu wal-azlamu rijs من عمل الشيطان. This is a filthy, dirty thing from shaitan. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. Allah didn't say don't do it. Brothers, pay attention. Allah didn't say don't drink alcohol. He didn't tell us not to get high, not to get drunk. He said, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. He said, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ is a word that comes from the word janib. Janib means one side. One side. Allah's telling you, you be on one side, and alcohol and all the things that fall under it, drugs, cocaine, all of that, laughing gas, all that stuff that these kids are taking, on the other side. It's not enough to just, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm with my friends, they got it. Well, no, I'm far away from it. How far? We're on two different sides, bro. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So you can be successful. Why do people sell drugs? Why do people sell drugs? So they can make money. Allah says staying away from it is where success comes from. You don't get success selling drugs, taking drugs, drinking alcohol, selling alcohol in the shops. You don't get success from that. That's why the greatest drug dealers we hear about, Pablo Escobar was one of the biggest, if not the biggest drug dealer that we all know, right? And how was his ending? And everyone else below him is the same. Either jail or dead. Does that make sense? Either jail or dead. So stay away from that nonsense. Okay, pay attention. Pay attention. If a person, he becomes drunk, can he pray? He can't pray, right? His wudhu's broken, right? Okay, but let's say he drank some alcohol and then he went to do wudhu. Has he got wudhu now? Has he got wudhu? He's got wudhu. He's got wudhu, right? If the what has fallen, the intoxication's gone. Does that make sense? There was a time when Allah Azza wa Jal allowed, not now. There was a time when Allah Azza wa Jal allowed the companions to come to the salah tipsy. Because alcohol was such a part of the Arab community that Allah didn't make it haram straight away. They said every table the Arabs sat on, there was alcohol. You couldn't separate it. So Allah Azza wa Jal didn't come and just say to the Arabs, alcohol is haram. Allah did it in stages. The first stage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. Allah said, they asked you about the alcohol. In it is good and in it is bad. There's good and there's bad. But the bad is worse than the good. That was the first stage. Second stage, Allah said to the companions, don't come to the salah drunk. He said to them, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. Don't come to the salah whilst you're drunk. Because it wasn't haram, right? Third what? Allah said, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, stay away from it. It was stages. The second stage, when Allah said, if you're going to drink, just don't come to the salah drunk. What this does is it limits the amount of time they can drink, right? So they'll be drinking even late night, but then you have to get to work in the morning, so maybe you won't drink. Does that make sense? But then the point was, don't come to the salah drunk, right? Why? حتى تعلموا ما تقولون, until you know what you're saying. Well, I pay attention, my brothers and sisters. Allah said, do not come to the salah if you drunk alcohol until you know what you're saying, until the effect is worn off. Pay attention. How many of us are praying salah and we know what we're saying? How many of us pray salah and we know what we say and we focus and we ponder? Or are we in salah the way a drunk man is praying salah? The reason why they were told don't come to the salah drunk is because you're not focusing on your salah. You're thinking about random things. How many of us, we come to the salah and we're thinking about what's on social media, we're thinking about what's happening after, what was happening before? Very sad, right? Very sad. We are like drunk people in salah. The reason I wanted to mention that was for the people who might be affected by drugs and alcohol, and for those of us who think we're not affected and we're free. No. We have the drug of social media, the drug of the dunya, the drug of work that affects us. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to protect us. The Salaf as-Salih, they used to say, the majority of people are drunk and they won't wake up till the angel of death comes and takes their soul. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to make us from Ahlul Yaqadah, people who are awake, and not Ahlul Ghafla, the ones who are heedless. Ameen Ya Rabb. The second thing that breaks your wudu, we said, is Zawal al-Aql. Anything that takes your mind away. This could be sleep, this could be alcohol, this could be what? This could be falling into a coma, falling unconscious, this could be fainting. Yes, this could be insanity, this could be jinn possession, when the jinn takes over you in that moment. Like sometimes you do a ruqya on someone and you see the person is moving a lot. That time they've lost their mind. The shaitan's on his tongue speaking. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's like he became what? It's like he became unconscious. Does that make sense? There's an exception though, that the Shafi'iy they mention. And that is that if a person goes to sleep, سواء إن كان عفوا, they say the istithna, the exception here is نوم قائد ممكن المقعد من محل جلوسه. They say the exception is when a person, he goes to sleep, but when he sleeps, he's sitting down and his bottom is firmly placed against the ground. Does that make sense? Without there being any gap between, any space between his bottom and the place where he's sitting. Does that make sense? And the reason they say this is because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Wika'u sahi al-aynan." The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the string that keeps the back passage closed is the eyes. I.e., when the eyes are awake, a person doesn't pass wind unknowingly, right? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Faman nam falyatawadda." So if a person goes to sleep, let him do wudu. The Shafi'iy, they took from this that the reason why you're being told to do wudu if you fall asleep is because you don't know if you pass wind from your back passage. Does that make sense? And in this hadith, the Prophet told us the eyes are the thing that control the back passage. I.e., what the Prophet ﷺ is trying to say is, when you're awake, when you're conscious, you know what comes out of you, right? And you can hold it, you can be conscious of it, and when it passes, you know it's passed. Does that make sense? You know it's passed, so therefore you can go and do your wudu. But if you're sitting firm, the wind's not going to pass. It can't pass. And try it one day. You can't do it. Just one day, no matter how badly you want to pass wind. If you're sitting and your bottom is firm against the surface upon which you are seated, you will not be able to pass wind. Does that make sense? So for that reason, the Shafi'i, they say, if you're sitting like this and you fall asleep, you're in your car and you fall asleep, no problem. You can get up and do your wudu. But they say it's still sunnah to do it. You know why? It's better to leave the khilaf. It's better to leave the difference of opinion. It's better to leave the difference of opinion. And by the way, the discussion goes on. They bring more dalil. The discussion's a lot in this, but now is not the time to go into it. Does that make sense? If we're talking about sleep, we have to talk about something called an-nu'as. Nu'as is the drowsiness that we feel before we fall asleep. You know, sometimes you're tired and you're like, did I fall asleep? Did I not? Have I broken my wudu? Have I not broken my wudu? Put your hand up if you got that feeling before. Right? Sisters, do you sometimes feel like that? Are you present? We don't know if the sisters are present. I'll address that question from point 1 at the end, inshallah ta'ala. So, what was the point I was making, sorry? Anyone feel like that? Anyone like, did I fall asleep? Did I not? Have I broken my wudu? Have I not broken my wudu? I don't know. Anyone feel like that? It happens to us, right? Pay attention. Being drowsy doesn't break your wudu. It's only when you fall asleep. How do you know you've fallen asleep though? What's the difference between sleep and drowsiness? Drowsiness is when you can still hear what's going on around you, even if you don't know what they're saying. Sometimes, a person's like, I'm drowsy, and his friend says, you were gone. He says, no, I heard you talking. He says, okay, what did you say? What were we talking about? Has anyone ever done that to you? What are we talking about? Say, this is batil, don't come to me with this. I don't need to know what you were saying. I just need to know, I could hear it. That's what the ulama they say. As long as you could hear it, even if you don't know what's being said. Does that make sense? Okay, how do you know you've fallen asleep? When you start dreaming. If you saw a dream, brother, you were gone. You started to see that girl. Akhi, she doesn't want to marry him, so I just keep it real. She wants to marry him instead. What are you saying, Akhi? You look like one of them dangerous brothers. How many wives you got? Huh? How old are you? 14. Never mind. Allah barik. If you fall asleep, then what happens? And you start to dream, that was sleep, your wudu's broken. Does that make sense? Okay, now I have a question for you. What if you're not sure, there's not people around you that you were lying down, felt a bit drowsy, people around you, there's no one there for you to have even heard, you're alone. And you definitely didn't dream. So which one do you do now? Go on. You take whichever one you are certain about. The certainty is that you're awake. Does that make sense? If you're in doubt, it's a very important point. This is a principle upon which there are hundreds and hundreds of rulings that are built. If you're in a state of doubt, did I fall asleep or not? And you don't have a way to really work it out. You go back to the one you were definitely certain about before the doubt came. And that was that I was awake. Does that make sense? Al-yaqeen la yazul bil-shak. The scholars say certainty cannot be removed by doubt. I'm certain I was awake. I lay down. Now I'm like, wait, did I fall asleep? I'm not certain about the sleep, so I take the certainty that I was upon, which was that I was awake. I knew that for a fact. And I'm not certain I fell asleep. If you had a dream, that was certainty. If you had a dream, certainty you fell asleep now. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay, good. So then summarize what we just took in that second point. That zawal al-aql, your mind going, and all the examples that I gave, all of these things, they break your wudu. Does that make sense? The exception is, if a person's sitting, he's sitting with his what? His bottom firmly placed against the ground. If he's lying down on his bottom, is he sitting on his bottom? He's not sitting. So does that count? Lying down on your bottom, does that count? No, sitting on your bottom is what we're talking about. Then we spoke about an-nu'as, which is what? Drowsiness. Drowsiness. Awa'ilun no, the introduction to sleep. And we said that doesn't break your wudu. Okay, how do you know that what you were sleeping or you were just in a state of nu'as, where you're just drifting off? The dhabit, the distinguishing factor, is that if you're in a state of drowsiness, you can hear what's happening around you even if you don't understand it. And you know you're asleep when you started to dream. And if you couldn't, and if you had neither of those signs, then you go back down to the asl, the default, which is the certainty. You're awake, brother. Does that make sense? You're awake. But of course, if you're lying down and you look up at and you wake up, you see 2 hours have gone by, half an hour has gone by, and you've lost track of all time. Of course, you fell asleep. We're not talking about 6 hours you were sleeping and you're like, wait, I didn't dream, so I guess I must have been awake. We're not talking about that kind of situation. We're talking about, when you're just drifting off. And as you're drifting off, you don't know, wait, was I just drifting off or did I actually drift off into sleep? We're talking about that moment there. Does that make sense? Because it can't be that you're like, an hour and a half later, I have no proof that anyone was around me. And I also didn't dream in this hour and a half. I guess I was just chilling there the whole time. No, we're not talking about that kind of situation. Okay, the third thing that breaks your wudu is mas'ul farj. It's to touch the private parts. Does that make sense? To touch the private parts. To touch the private parts from the what? Front or the back. Pay attention. When we talk about the back, we don't talk about the person touching the bottom. If a person touches his bottom, or the cheeks, I don't know the appropriate term for it, gluteus something. There was a word for it, right? And we're not talking about all of that. But we're talking about the actual hole from which it comes from. If a person touches that, that's what breaks the wudu. If a person touches his bottom, no problem. is they touch the whole. Does that make sense? That is what breaks the wudu, or touching your front. Pay attention. If a person touches their own private part or the private part of someone else, both situations, the person who touched his wudu is broken. For example, a mother is cleaning her child. If she's cleaning the child, will she touch the child's private part? Undoubtedly, right? The mother's wudu is gone, and so has gone the wudu of just the mother. The child has no wudu, right? Okay, pay attention. There's a male doctor, he's examining another male patient. So he touches the private part of the male patient during the examination. Both of them Muslim, both have wudu. Whose wudu is broken, whose wudu remained? Or has both of their wudu gone? Who can answer? Do you understand the question? Yeah? What do you think? Doctor's gone. What about the patient? But he got touched. What happened to him? What do you think? Say that again?
Just the three conditions that we've done.
Say that again, sorry?
Just from the three conditions that we've done, it doesn't meet any of the conditions.
Yeah, his wudu's not gone because he hasn't touched anything, right?
Yeah.
Good. So then we say that the wudu is broken of the mass. The one who touched, not the malmus, not the one who was touched. Does that make sense? Not the one who was touched. Pay attention. This is only if the touch was بباطن الكف أو بباطن الأصابع. If the touch was done with the inside of the palm or the inside of the fingers. If the touch was done from the back of the hand, or the back of the fingers, or the side of the hand, or the side and the tips of the fingers, it doesn't break the wudu. So when is the wudu broken? With the inside of the palm and the fingers.
Does niyah come into this?
Say that again? It doesn't matter if you intended it or not. It's the touching. Yeah? It's the touching.
What if they got the wearing gloves?
We'll come to this, inshallah. We'll come to it. Is that clear, yeah? Okay. What's the dalil that touching one's private part breaks the wudu? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إِذَا أَفْضَى أَحَدُكُمْ بِيَدِهِ إِلَى فَرْجِهِ فَلْيَتَوَضَّأ. If any one of you touches his private part with his hand, then let him do wudu. What's the dalil that a person's wudu breaks if they touch the private part of someone else? How is it the same dalil?
Touching of the private part that breaks.
The Prophet said, إِذَا أَفْضَى أَحَدُكُمْ بِيَدِهِ إِلَى فَرْجِهِ. He touches his private part, then let him do wudu. But what's the dalil to say that if you touch someone else's private part, you have to do wudu? It's a principle in usul al-fiqh that I'm going to teach you. Write it down. It's called qiyas al-awla. Sometimes there are things in the sharia that are mentioned, okay? There are things in sharia which are mentioned. Like for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفْ. Don't say to your mom and dad, uff. But we know we cannot hit our parents. Can we hit our parents? We can't hit our parents. Does that make sense? But what's the dalil you can't hit your parents? This verse. فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمْ أُفْ. Don't say uff to them. How's uff an evidence that you can't hit your mom and dad? Allah Azza wa Jal told you the minimum thing that you can't do to harm them, which is to say, So if you cannot do the minimum to harm them, of course anything greater than the minimum is going to be worse. It's qiyas al-awla. So then here we also use qiyas al-awla. We say if by touching your own private part your wudu will break, then of course touching the private of someone else is definitely going to break your wudu. Does that make sense? If you don't understand it too much, don't worry, we'll come to it inshallah ta'ala in the future. But for those who do understand, that's a benefit. It's qiyas al-awla. And many examples will come. The fourth thing that breaks your wudu is lams الرجل. For a man to touch بشرة امرأة, the skin of a woman, أجنبية, she is a foreigner to him. Doesn't mean that she's, from Spain and he's from the UK. It means she's not from his maharim. He's not her mahram. She could be his neighbor, but she's not from his maharim. Does that make sense? Kabiratin, and she has to be a woman which is of a particular age. If a person touches a baby, for example, picks up a little baby girl, doesn't break their wudu. Bila ha'il, without a barrier. Without a barrier. Let me repeat. Lamsul rajul, for a man to touch a woman, to touch her skin, the skin of the woman. Does that make sense? And this woman is ajnabiyya, she's a foreigner. He's not mahram to her. And she's of a particular age, we'll talk about what that age is. Bila ha'il. And when he touched her, there was no barrier. There was no barrier. He touched her skin directly. Does that make sense? Intaqada wudu'uh. Wudu'ah. His wudu is gone. Intaqada wudu'uh. His wudu is gone. Okay, pay attention. This is the same way if a man touches a woman and if a woman touches a man. If a man touches a woman and a woman touches a man. Okay. When we talk about the woman having to be of a particular age for this touch to break the wudu, and the man having to be of a particular age for this touch to break the wudu, what's the age we're talking about? There's no mentioned age. It's not like you were told age 10, for example, or 12. What the scholars say is من بلغ حدا يشتهى عند الرجال عفوا يشتهى عند النساء من ذوات طبع السليم. That for the man to break the woman's wudu when this touch takes place, he has to have reached an age where normal, sane women who are not diseased and sick and perverted may find him attractive. Does that make sense? I'm going to explain it again, don't stress. You know, some people are a bit perverted and they find little kids attractive, like a 5-year-old. That's not a normal person. That's not a person who's mentally well. Does that make sense? A woman who likes a 5-year-old boy is not mentally well. So touching a 5-year-old boy's hand, picking up a baby, it's not going to break your wudu. Because that person's not desired by normal men or normal women. Does that make sense? The wudu will break if you touch a woman, or a man touches a woman, or a woman touches a man, and the one they touched could potentially be desired by the opposite gender if that person is normal. Does that make sense? Go on, you have a question. That's like sane people, like they're not pedophiles basically. Does that make sense? A person is sane. He's normal, he's not sick, he's not mentally, he's not sick. A person who does that kind of stuff is sick, right? So the ulama say, man balagha haddan, this, if someone looks at this man, if a woman looks at this man, and she's normal, she's not sick, she might find him attractive. She might say, you know, I like this man. Does that make sense? By the way, we don't look at the kuffar's age for this. Their ages for this, we don't look at it. Does that make sense? You know why? Because don't kids who are in year 7 desire each other? We're not talking about whether you desire this kid or not. But do they get desired by one another? It's a problem then, isn't it? Your wudu could break. Do you understand my point? For example, it's illegal for someone to marry someone in year 8 when they are, for example, 20 or whatever have you. And we're not saying, and someone who's 20 may not desire this woman in year 8, this girl in year 8. But within year 8, are there boys that desire her? So then she is desired. So then the wudu can break. Do you understand the point? Do you guys understand that? Do you guys understand that? Okay, good.
What does put the age of baligh for?
What was that, sorry?
If you can use the age of baligh.
So that they don't mention baligh, because a woman may not become baligh to the age of 15, potentially 14, but someone may look at her and think, you know, and may feel attractive. Even another 14-year-old boy, right, may look at her and think she's attractive. So then him touching her skin would break their wudu.
So it's not the fact that she's desired by you, the fact that she can
It's not the fact that she's desired by you, but she can be desired by someone of your gender who's sane, who's not sick, who's normal. Does that make sense? Even if they're younger than you. So don't look at the kuffar and their age and whatnot and so on and so forth.
What about your wife?
Look.
You're not in desire, just
Wife breaks the wudu according to this, 100%. Yeah. Even if there's no desire. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the dalil that the Shafi'iy they use, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاء, touching them. Allah used the word mas, touching. Does that make sense? So they say, based on this, touching the wife, it will break the wudu. The next thing is, lamsul bashara. Yes?
Sorry, a couple questions. The brother just asked, what about the wife?
Yeah.
You said, if it's mahram to her, that's one of the conditions for...
If you're mahram to it, it's fine. We're coming to it.
He said his wife, but you said that's...
Wife's she's not your mahram, otherwise you married her, right? Mahram means someone's haram. This always happens. I was waiting for this. Jazakallah khair. Mahram is someone who's haram to marry. If a person married, if his wife is from his mahram, that's a problem. He shouldn't have married her.
Yeah, apparently there's a hadith where the Prophet was praying.
Yeah.
I showed her that,
They said it was over her clothing that was on her that he pushed. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what they say. So it's a big discussion. It's a big discussion. We'll, inshallah, step by step. But this is what the madhab says. So the next stage is what? Lamsul bashara, touching of the skin. From that you know that touching her hair doesn't break your wudu. Right? Touching her skin breaks the wudu. Why? Because no one touches their hair and thinks, oh wow, and gets excited. It happens based on the contact with the skin. Because the reasoning for this is that, look, even if a man touches the woman with, you have to understand the reasoning, by the way, behind these things, yeah? A man touches a woman, can excite him now. Does that make sense? And when he gets excited, what can pass through him? What's likely to come now? Pre-ejaculatory fluid. And for the woman as well, it can happen. Pre-ejaculatory fluid. This breaks the wudu. It's najis. Because earlier we talked al-kharij min as-sabilayn. Anything that comes out the front and back, right? Breaks the wudu. So if that pre-ejaculatory fluid comes out, it's going to break the wudu. Does that make sense? So touching the hair doesn't excite you like that. Remember, we're talking about normal people here. We're talking about normal people. Dawat, tab'is, or the tab'is salim. Does that make sense? People who are normal. But touching a hair of the opposite gender doesn't make a person think, oh wow, this is so exciting. Does that make sense? It doesn't do that.
I got 2 questions first, just quickly.
Okay, sure.
I'm in a bus, so the bus breaks suddenly.
Yeah.
The woman wants to fall down. I just catch her to protect from fall down.
But you hold her clothing, right?
No. It happened with
If it touched the skin, it would break the wudu. Yeah, if it touched the skin, it would break the wudu.
And someone is giving you, a woman giving you something, accidental touch you, break your wudu.
If it's skin on skin contact, it will break the wudu. Yeah.
Just confirm, it's the wudu of the one who touches, and not...
Both of them there. Both of them. We're gonna come to it. Your questions are gonna get answered, inshallah ta'ala. So, what about if a person touches, for example, her teeth? No, it's the skin. Does that make sense? It's the skin. Because people don't touch teeth. Let me touch them teeth. And they don't that's not something that makes the pre-ejaculatory fluid pass. Does that make sense? The one we need to go into a bit of detail here is ajnabiyya. She's a foreigner. In order for you to know that she is a foreigner to you, you need to know who is not a foreigner. So there are women are either of 2 types to you. They're either your maharim, women that are haram for you to marry, or they're ajnabiyyat, they are foreign women, and they are halal for you to marry. So the women that are haram for you to marry, they're mentioned in the Quran. Allah said, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ وَأَخْوَاتُكُمْ وَعَمَّاتُكُمْ وخالاتكم وبنات الأخ وبنات الأخت وأمهاتكم اللاتي أرضعنكم وأخواتكم من الرضاعة وأمهات نسائكم. To the end of the verse, the women that are haram for you. Does that make sense? These women are 18. 18 women are haram for you to marry. 18 women are what? They are haram for you to marry. And these 18, write them down, brothers, it's very important, because now you're going to tell me, can I hang around with this woman from my family? I'm going to say, bro, is she one of these 18? Does that make sense? I kind of hang around with this family member. Is she from these 18? 18. These women, you are mahram to them. These 18 can be divided into 3 categories. So we're going to write down 3 categories. We're going to mention each category, how many it has, and then we're going to mention them. The first category is, she is mahram to you. She is haram for you to marry based on nasab, lineage. Because of lineage, because of her lineage. Because of a certain, bloodline. Because of a bloodline. Does that make sense? The second reason is rada'a. Because of milk. Because of milk. I'll explain each one. Because of breastfeeding. Musahara is the third. Musahara means because of relation, in-laws, because of the in-law relationship. The in-law relationship. I'll explain each one. Nasab is 7. There are 7 women that fall into this. Who are they? حرمت عليكم. Haram for you is ummahatukum, your mum. You can't marry your mum. Evil world we live in nowadays. People do this filthy stuff. Can't marry your mum. حرمت عليكم ummahatukum, your mum. Wa banatukum, your daughter, your daughters. Wa akhwatukum, your sisters. Your sisters. Wa ammatukum, your mum's sister. Your dad's sister. Your paternal aunt. Your paternal aunt. Wa khalatukum, your mum's sister. Your khala, your mum's sister. Wa banatul akhi, your brother's daughters. Wa banatul ukhti, your sister's daughters. How many did we mention? Can you count? Did I mention all 7? Yes? Your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your dad's sister, your mum's sister, your brother's daughter, your sister's daughters. Pay attention. If your brother has granddaughters, you can't marry them either. Great-great-granddaughters, all the way down, can't marry them. Same way with your mum. If your mum has a grandmother, great-grand, all the way up, you can't marry any of them. They are all your maharim. So your grandmas are your maharim. Are from your maharim. Does that make sense? Your grandchildren, all the way down, great-great-grandchildren. Your brother's grandchildren. Does that make sense? All of that, they are your maharim. Please question to the end because we've got so much to go through. So this is 7 from nasab that are haram for you. The 7 which are haram from you, from breastfeeding, are just like the 7 that are haram from nasab. There's a hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, يحرم من الرضاعة كما يحرم من النسب أو كما قال. The same things that make haram your lineage, the same things milk will make those same relationships haram. For example, I'll give you examples. The woman that gives milk to you. In nasab we said there's a mum, right? So the woman who gives you milk is haram for you. Her daughter is haram for you. Does that make sense? Her daughter is haram for you. And like that, you apply all the same way. Her daughter's daughter, her sister, all of that. Does that make sense? All of that gets applied in the exact same way. Yes?
With the milk, is get occasion or just
What was that, sorry?
occasion with the milk?
Yes.
Breastfeeding is get occasion. Let's say if someone being given once, is it?
So there's difference opinion amongst scholars. They discuss how many times is it and so on and so forth and what age. We have an entire section on it that we're going to come to inshallah ta'ala. I think Kitab al-Nikah we're going to come to inshallah ta'ala in details. And by the way, the issue of milk is very good. Nowadays, many women, they start practicing and now they have no men. Apart from their father, who maybe is busy, and their brother who works. She may not even have a brother. She wants to go to Umrah, who takes her? She wants to travel, who takes her? She's in trouble, who's there to help? She needs advice, who's there? She's got no mahrams. Does that make sense? But in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the concept of breastfeeding was very common. The Prophet ﷺ had been given milk by many women. And by virtue of that, many women were now his sisters through milk. And he had brothers through milk. Brothers also through milk. This benefits you, wallahi. It benefits you. You know, your daughter will have milk brothers. It just makes the bonds closer and just someone in the community that can help and be a mahram to her. If you need to travel, it's an emergency, advice, whatever have you. Nowadays it's like, and do you guys understand the point? Good. The 4th is musahara. Musahara is what? Musahara is through the in-law relationship. And that is the mother-in-law. If you marry a woman, her mum is haram for you. You're her mahram. Even if you divorce the girl. Al-Rabiba. Al-Rabiba is your daughter-in-law. If you marry a woman and she already has a child. If you marry a woman and she what? She already has a child. That girl is haram for you. She's like your daughter now. Does that make sense? Zawjul ab. your stepmom, your dad's wife. Does that make sense? Your dad's other wife. Your dad's other wife. If he divorces her, if your dad dies, may Allah give all of our fathers long lives and those who have passed away, may Allah have mercy on them, forgive them their sins, and our mothers and all of the Muslims who have passed away. Ameen. Basically, if the dad is no longer with that woman for whatever reason, you cannot marry that woman. Does that make sense? And you are her mahram. You are her mahram. Does that make sense? And the last and the fourth one is zawjul ibn, your daughter-in-law. If your son marries a woman, you can never marry that woman even if he divorces her. Yes? So then we have 18. We have 7 from nasab, 7 from lineage, 7 from milk, and 4 from marriage, marital relations, in-law type relations. Keep questions and it's okay. Go on, is it?
With your wife's daughter, so your daughter-in-law, you never said if you divorce the wife, you never marry her.
We're going to come to it, inshallah. A lot of Kitab al-Nikah, a lot of details. There's these, you're going to see, every lesson is like, okay, it's making sense, we're getting to it. Because everything is so interconnected. When you're studying Tahara, this is ahkam pertaining to marriage that we're slightly going into now. And we just have to touch on it slightly and then quickly get through to it, inshallah ta'ala. So now we understand the issue of the maharim. If you touch the skin of these women, your wudu doesn't break. These 18. If you touch these women, your wudu doesn't break. And the rest of the rulings pertaining to the maharim apply. You can look at them. You can spend time with them. Yes, you cannot marry them. You can travel with them. And so on and so forth. And so on and so forth. Remember we said the touch, we said one last thing about when we defined the touch, bila ha'il, without a barrier. If you touch without the barrier, it breaks the wudu. Meaning if I touch a woman with a barrier, does it break the wudu? If I touch her with gloves on, does it break wudu? No. Pay attention. That doesn't mean it's halal to touch a woman with gloves. A lot of people say, I'm going to shake my hands with this woman. I'm going to wear gloves though. No. You do not touch the woman with gloves or without. Whether it breaks the wudu is a different topic. Whether it's halal or haram, separate topic completely. Does that make sense? So yes, it doesn't break the wudu if you have gloves on. But we're not saying you're allowed to do it. Okay, question. What are the differences between massul farj and lams al-mar'ah? The differences between touching the private part and that breaking the wudu and touching a woman and that breaking the wudu. Because both are touch. Does that make sense? And both are touch of body parts. So what's the difference? So we'll mention 2 differences inshallah ta'ala. The first difference is لمس المرأة أجنبية ينتقض, that when a man touches a woman, the wudu of both the toucher and the one who has been touched is broken. But whereas the touching of the private part, if someone touches the private part of another, it only breaks the wudu of the one who touched the private parts, unless the private part of a woman who is ajnabi was touched. Then of course both of them would be. Does that make sense? The second difference is that touching of the private part only breaks the wudu if it's with the inside of the hand. Touching of the woman breaks the wudu regardless of any part of the hand you touch her with. The back of the hand, the side of the hand, the tips of your fingers. Because it's flesh on flesh. Does that make sense?
But it's anywhere in the skin, or just not?
Anywhere in the skin. Anywhere, it's not limited. Okay, now I'm going to ask you guys a question, which I'm very scared to ask because of all the off topics. If you guys promise me you will not take me off topic with this question, I'll ask it. Inshallah. Yes? Okay, beautiful. Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, if a man says to his wife, شَعْرُكَ طَالِقٌ وَقَعَ. If he says to a woman, your hair is divorced, the divorce takes place. If a man says, طَلَقْتُ شَعْرَكَ, I've divorced your hair, he says, divorce takes place. Why? Because the hair is, no, you're not involved. You know the answer. 100%. If I told it to you a few days ago, don't even put your hand up. Allah Akbar. Where's Nabil? I know he would have done the same thing. You know the answer, right? Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If a man says to his wife, your hair is divorced, the divorce takes place. Why? Because the hair is a part of her. Hair is a part of her. So he's divorced her. But if a man touches the woman's hair, the wudu doesn't break. Even though the hair is a part of her. Why?
Is it because a normal person wouldn't get excited by touching the woman's hair?
Was that sorry?
A normal person wouldn't get excited by touching the woman's hair.
Yeah, barakallah feek. The reason is because the scholars say the hair is definitely part of the woman. And had it been a place of excitement, it would have broken the wudu. And the reason why the wudu is being broken is because of the desire and the excitement that comes from the opposite gender. Because it doesn't come from the hair doesn't break the wudu. Because there's a principle, al-hukm yaduru ma'illati, the ruling revolves around the reasoning. Whereas in the chapter of divorce, this is the issue of desires, none of that comes into it. He's getting rid of her now. So irrespective of what is taking place in the chapter of wudu, don't think that just because the hair doesn't apply here, it doesn't apply there either. You know why I'm telling you this, my brothers and my sisters? To teach you to be humble when someone asks you a question. Sometimes we think we know the answer. And a person will think, oh wait, this is similar to this. And then he places a fatwa without knowledge. There's a subject that the scholars study called al-furuq, differences. Al-ashbah wal-nada'ir, things that look very similar but they're different. Does that make sense? Things that look very similar but they are different. They look so similar, but there's a difference. And the difference is so subtle. And that difference can be the reason between someone is alive, someone is dead. Someone is divorced, someone is not. Someone is inherited from, not inherited from. Someone is a Muslim or is a kafir. It's not for you and I to say. Say, Wallahu a'lam. Fas'alu ahla dhikr in kuntum la ta'lamun. And it's also to tell you that there is a subject called al-furuq. When we study fiqh, when we study Shafi'i fiqh, there are 20 subjects that you have to study to say that I know Shafi'i fiqh. Did you know that? How many subjects? 20. One of them is called al-furuq. Does that make sense? So it's a very good subject. Shall I give you another example of a farq? Yes? Okay. Why is it that the wudu of a woman, a girl who is young, doesn't break when you touch her? For example, a man picks up his friend's baby daughter. It doesn't break. Why? Because there's no desire for her, right? There's no desire for this. Right? Okay. But touching an old woman, very old, who you have no desire for either, breaks your wudu. It will break your wudu. You see the similarity? As in both don't have desire. That's the what? That's the tashbih, that's the similarity. But the farq in the hukum, this one won't break your wudu. This one sends you back home to the sink, mate. Why? Go on. Get it. Beautiful. The little girl is not mahallun lishahwa. It's not even possible for a person to act out their desire with her. Intimacy can't even take place. It's not impossible. It's not even possible. Does that make sense? With this woman, even though you don't desire, it's possible. It is possible. Because that possibility is there, she is mahallun lishahwa. She is someone where desire can be practiced, it can be exercised. She has herself maybe exercised it with her husband. Then that is why the ruling is different. The scholars, they observe these deep things. Does that make sense? Okay. Now we've taken the things that break your wudu. How many are there? Quickly, what is it? What? What's the first one? No, don't look at your notes, brother. Anything that comes out the front and the back. Barakallah fi. Second thing? 1 second. I'll be honest with you. I was asking him. Zawal al-aql. Okay. Third, quick. No, you looked. Too late, you lost. What's the third? Touching the private parts. And the last one? Huh? Umar.
Touching someone that is mahram.
Yeah, touching a woman that's not your mahram. Okay, good. Now, the last thing we have to do in the fiqh class before we stop for salah, inshallah, and we go for the when we go for the next thing, which is the issue of the Allah Azza, which is 90 names. And by the way, today we're going through two great names, Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum. And I really would urge you guys to be patient and stick around for that. We recite Ayatul Kursi every day, some of us 5 times a day after our salah. Why? What's the significance of these two names, Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum? Enough to know that these names are great is that they mentioned right at the beginning of the greatest verse. So what makes them so great? After salah, inshallah. Anyway, the last thing we have to discuss is مَا الَّذِي يَحْرُمُ عَلَى الْمُحْدِثِ. What are the things that are haram for a person whose wudu has broken, who is in a state of hadathul asghar? Does that make sense? And what's haram on this person is 4 things. Number 1, salah, they can't pray, regardless of whether it's a fard salah or a voluntary salah. And also the scholars mention what comes under the salah here is sajdatul tilawa. The sajda for tilawa in the Quran, right? Number 2 is wasajdatul shukr. Sajdatul shukr is also for a person not allowed to do if he's in a state of wudu. Where he doesn't have a state of wudu. He's not in a state of wudu. Does that make sense? Question I'm going to ask you, which type of shukr do you do sajdatul shukr for? Who does sajdatul shukr, by the way, when something great happens? It's a moment to be thankful to Allah. Who does sajdatul shukr to Allah Azza wa Jal? We should really do this. We should do this, wallahi. We should place our head down on the ground and thank Allah for what He's given us. Since not many people are involved in sajdatul shukr, I will leave it. And maybe if you guys have more passion for it, I'll tell you when you should do it and the type of things you should do it for, inshallah ta'ala. Or if you have time, you can ask in the Q&A. Alaykum salam. Khutbatul Jum'ah. The khatib given the khutbah, he has to be in a state of wudu. So these are 3 extra things above salah. Yes? Person can't pray salah, fard or nafal, obligatory or voluntary, and that includes sajdatul tilawa, sajdatul shukr, and khutbatul jum'ah. The second thing is tawaf. A person cannot do tawaf around the Kaaba. Brothers and sisters, oh, Allahu Akbar. We do umrah groups. And I can tell you, one of the most painful things in life, is that you just took a group out of the hotel, you told everyone do your wudu, and you get to the Kaaba, and you got a whole group to take care of, and you're one guy, and then someone breaks their wudu. And you're like, now do I leave them here, or do I take him out? Or do I tell him to wait here, or do I finish tawaf with them? I have never seen a situation where it worked out. People always get lost. I'm just saying, if you come umrah with me, I'm putting you in Abu Bakr's group. If you're going to break your wudu, I'll keep it umrah with you. That is very long. Tawaf around the Kaaba, it cannot be done without tahara. Now,
What's the situation there? Because they're there, but you find that the women and men, they're all tawaf together.
Yes.
They're shoving.
yeah, there is no problem. Out of necessity, because it cannot be helped. It cannot be helped. عمت به البلوى. The situation became too, like the religion is about ease.
If you want to go to the Aswad there, it's going to be...
Yeah, so at the haram, you're going to touch women. To condition it there would be too much. So that's an exception because we have a principle. وَلَيْسَ وَاجِبٌ بِالْاقْتِدَارِ وَلَا مُحَرَّمٌ مَعَ الضِّرَارِ. There is nothing haram if staying away from that haram is going to cause you harm now. For example, I can't eat swine. I can't eat a pig, but if I'm going to die of starvation, that's not haram for me anymore because it's going to cause me harm. So in that situation, the scholars, they allow it. Tawaf, okay, you need wudu for it. The third thing is massul mushaf, touching the mushaf. To touch the mushaf without tahara is what? It's problematic. It's not allowed unless you have wudu.
That means you can't read Quran at all if you don't have...
You can read Quran, but you just can't touch the mushaf. You can't touch the mushaf. But you can read the Quran. The fourth thing is hamlul mushaf. Because Allah said, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. Allah said, no one touches it, i.e. the Quran, except those who are in a state of tahara. Except those who are in a state of tahara. The jumhur, the majority of the ulama, they took this verse to mean that a person cannot touch the mushaf. The fourth thing is hamlul mushaf, carrying the mushaf. And why? Qiyasul awla, they use that. Remember we took Qiyasul awla earlier? If touching your private part breaks your wudu, then touching someone else's definitely breaks your wudu. If touching the mushaf breaks your wudu, then carrying it is more than touching it. So that breaks your wudu. But there's an exception. If you carry the mushaf in a bag, if you carry it in a bag, but that bag has many things inside of it. That bag has many things inside of it. And you're not intending to just carry the mushaf in the bag. You're intending to carry your books, your pencil case, your wallet, and the mushaf happens to be in there as well. There's no problem with you carrying that bag in that situation. Also the Quran on the phone, on the app, it takes the same ruling because the phone holds many things. It's like a bag. It doesn't just hold the mushaf. It holds your phone book. It holds your apps. It holds your galleries, your pictures, and the mushaf is in there as well. And also the scholars say, aslan, this is not a mushaf. So even if you were to touch it, it doesn't apply. That's the question you had, right? Yeah. See, I told you, just a little bit waiting, brothers, it gets there. Yes. I can just see it in your eyes, that's the question you had. Now, you can read it without touching it. Without touching it. Fahmed? As long as you don't touch it, you can read it.
Oh, you put the mushaf in your pocket.
Yes. What was that, sorry? Barakallah fi. Naam. That's the end of the lesson.